At my son's funeral, my daughter-in-law whispered loudly, "I'm not taking care of that old witch." I heard every word, and I didn't turn around. I didn't react. I didn't even blink. Because in that moment, I understood something very clearly. This wasn't grief. This was removal. I walked out of my son's funeral without saying a single word. And the next morning, I went to the bank. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and tell me where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story reaches." Because what happened that day wasn't just cruel. It was calculated. The funeral home smelled like lilies and polished wood. Too clean. Too controlled. The kind of place where people expect grief to behave. To stay quiet. To sit still. I stood at the front of the room. Hands folded. Back straight. Eyes fixed on the casket. Daniel was inside. My son. 42 years old. 42. That number didn't make sense. It still doesn't. People came up one by one. "I'm so sorry. He was such a good man. If you need anything," their voices blurred together. Soft. Polite. Empty. I nodded. I thanked them. I did everything I was supposed to do. Because that's what you learn after a certain age. You learn how to hold yourself together, even when everything inside you is falling apart. But then, there was her. Clara. Standing just a few feet behind me. Not crying. Not shaking. Not grieving. Just talking. Leaning slightly towards someone I didn't recognize. And then she said it. "I'm not taking care of that old witch." Soft. Sharp. Deliberate. Loud enough. I didn't turn around. Because turning would have meant acknowledging it. And I wasn't ready to give her that. But something inside me shifted. Not broken. Not shattered. Rearranged. Because that sentence wasn't just cruel. It was honest. Daniel used to stand between us. Always. "Mom, she doesn't mean it like that." "Clara, Mom just worries." He spent 15 years trying to make two people fit together, who never really did. And now he was gone. And there was no one left to soften anything. The service continued. A hymn I didn't finish. A speech I didn't hear. A slideshow I barely saw. Daniel at 10. Daniel at 20. Daniel at 40. Smiling. Living. Gone. I stood there through all of it. Still. Quiet. Because grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like silence. After the final prayer, people started to leave. Slowly. Carefully. Clara didn't come to me. Not once. She stayed near the door. Talking. Receiving condolences. Like this loss belonged to her. Maybe in her mind it did. I stayed until the room was almost empty. Until the funeral director stepped closer and said softly, "Mrs. Hayes, we're ready." Ready. I walked forward. Placed my hand on the casket. Cold. Solid. Real. "I'm here," I whispered. I don't know if I meant for him or for myself. Then I turned. And I walked out. I didn't look for Clara. I didn't need to. I already knew exactly where she stood. And for the first time, I knew exactly where I did too. The next morning, I went to the bank. And that's when everything started to make sense. The bank was quiet that morning. Not silent, but controlled. The kind of quiet where every sound feels intentional. The soft clicking of keyboards, the low murmur of conversations behind glass offices, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I had been there dozens of times before. Depositing checks. Asking simple questions. Smiling politely at tellers who called me ma'am with rehearsed warmth. But this time, I wasn't there for something simple. This time, I wasn't there as someone's mother. Or someone's widow. I was there as myself. "Good morning, Mrs. Hayes." The young woman at the front desk recognized me immediately. Her smile was automatic, professional. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she added, her tone softening just enough to feel appropriate. I nodded. "Thank you." My voice was steady. Too steady, maybe. But grief doesn't always show itself the way people expect. "Is there anything we can help you with today?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I'd like to review all accounts connected to my son, Daniel Hayes." There was a brief pause. Just a flicker. Not confusion, more like recalibration. "Of course," she said quickly. "Let me get someone from account services." I sat down in a leather chair near the window. The sunlight was brighter here than in my kitchen. Sharper. Less forgiving. Outside, people moved along the sidewalk, carrying coffee cups, talking on their phones, living their lives as if nothing had shifted in the world. As if nothing had ended. A man in his 40s approached me a few minutes later. Dark suit. Clean tie. Measured steps. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Robert. I'll be assisting you today." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, but not overpowering. Respectful. That mattered more than I expected. Please, come with me. His office was small but tidy. Everything in its place. A framed certificate on the wall. A computer screen already awake. A notepad aligned perfectly with the edge of the desk. Order. I appreciated that. Again, I'm very sorry for your loss, he said as we sat down. Thank you, I replied. Then I folded my hands in my lap and got straight to the point. I need to understand exactly what accounts my son had and what happens to them now. Robert nodded, typing something into his computer. Of course, I'll walk you through everything. His voice was calm, practiced, but not empty. He turned the screen slightly so I could see. Daniel had 3 primary accounts with us, he began. A checking account, a savings account, and a joint investment portfolio. Joint. The word settled in the air between us. With his wife? I asked. Yes, he said. Of course. I watched as numbers filled the screen. Balances. Transactions. Dates. A lifetime reduced to rows and columns. He also had an automatic monthly transfer set up, Robert continued. That made me look up. A transfer. I repeated. Yes. $1,500, sent out on the 1st of every month. My heart didn't race. It didn't drop. It simply stilled. And where was it going? I asked. Robert clicked again, scrolled, paused, then looked at the screen a little longer than necessary. That's interesting, he said quietly. I leaned forward slightly. Tell me. He turned the screen toward me. The transfers were labeled as support payments, he explained. But the receiving account isn't in your name. I frowned. That doesn't make sense. No, he agreed. It doesn't. He clicked into the details. The account belongs to, he stopped, just for a second, then continued. Clara Hayes. The room didn't spin. I didn't gasp. I didn't react the way people expect when something breaks open in front of them. Because this didn't feel like a surprise. It felt like confirmation. For how long? I asked. Robert checked the dates again. 26 months. I did the math in my head. $1,500. Every month. For over 2 years. Daniel had been sending money. Regularly. Consistently. With intention. But not to me. I see, I said. And I meant it. I did see. More clearly than I had in a long time. There's something else, Robert added carefully. I looked at him. What is it? He hesitated, then opened another file. There's a note attached to the transfer setup. A note? Yes. It was entered manually. He turned the screen again. And this time, I read it myself. For Mom. Monthly support. Make sure she's taken care of. The words were simple, direct, unmistakable. I read them twice. Not because I didn't understand them, but because I needed to feel them. For Mom. I sat back slowly, my hands resting calmly in my lap. Daniel hadn't forgotten me. He hadn't neglected me. He hadn't left me behind. Someone had stepped in between. Quietly, carefully, consistently. And I already knew who. Mrs. Hayes, Robert said gently. Would you like me to print these records for you? I nodded. Yes. My voice didn't shake. It didn't crack. It didn't betray anything. Because inside, something had shifted again. Not grief this time. Not confusion. Understanding. Please include everything, I added. All transactions. All notes. Of course. As the printer hummed softly in the corner of the room, I looked out the window. The world was still moving. Unaware. Unchanged. But I wasn't. Clara thought I was a burden. A responsibility she could refuse. She thought I didn't know. Didn't see. Didn't understand. But now I did. And this wasn't about money. Not really. This was about something much deeper. Something colder. Control. I stood up when Robert handed me the folder. Thick. Organized. Complete. Is there anything else I can assist you with? He asked. I met his eyes. And for the first time that morning, I allowed a hint of something sharper to surface. No, I said. You've already helped me more than you know. I walked out of the bank with the folder in my hand. The weight of it steady. Grounding. Clara had made one mistake. She assumed I would never look. She assumed wrong. And now, I was ready to see just how far this went. The folder sat on my kitchen table for a long time before I opened it. Not because I was afraid of what was inside, but because I already knew. There's a difference between suspicion and confirmation. Suspicion whispers. Confirmation is quiet. Heavy. Final. I took off my coat, hung it neatly by the door, and moved through the house the way I always did. Slow, deliberate, familiar. Routine has a way of keeping things from falling apart. Even when everything already has. The clock on the wall read 10:42 a.m., same clock Daniel had installed years ago after the old one stopped working. "It's easier to read, Mom," he had said, standing on a chair, adjusting it slightly to the left. "You won't have to squint anymore." I didn't need to squint now. Everything was painfully clear. I sat down, pulled the folder closer, ran my fingers over the edge of the paper. Smooth, precise, official. Then I opened it. Page after page. Transactions, dates, amounts. Every single one of them telling the same story. $1,500. First of the month. Consistent. Uninterrupted. I followed the pattern with my eyes. January, February, March. Year after year. No gaps. No hesitation. Daniel had never been careless. Even as a child. If he said he would do something, he did it. All the way through. And now here it was. Proof. Not of his absence, but of his intention. For Mom. Monthly support. Make sure she's taken care of. I paused on that line again. Let it sit. Let it settle. He had thought about me. Planned for me. Protected me. Even when I didn't know it. And someone had taken that and redirected it. Quietly. Systematically. I leaned back in my chair, closed the folder halfway, and stared out the window. The backyard looked the same. The oak tree still stood in the corner. The fence still leaned slightly to the right. The wind moved through the branches in that same soft, familiar way. Nothing had changed, except everything. And then, slowly, the memories began to shift. Not new memories, old ones, but seen differently. Clara standing in my kitchen 2 years ago, holding a stack of envelopes. "Oh, I'll handle the bills, Mrs. Hayes. It's easier this way." At the time, I had smiled. Grateful, relieved, even. Because Daniel had been working longer hours back then. Because Clara had insisted. Because she said it with confidence. "It's just temporary," she added. Temporary. I opened the folder again. Checked the dates. 2 years. More than temporary. Another memory. A conversation over dinner. Daniel pushing his plate away, looking tired. "Mom, are you doing okay financially?" I had laughed lightly. "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be?" He exchanged a glance with Clara. Quick. Almost invisible. "You sure?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I don't need much." And that was true. I didn't. But now I understood the question. He wasn't asking casually. He was checking. Because he thought I was receiving something. And I had unknowingly told him that I was. I closed my eyes briefly. Not in pain. Not in regret. But in recognition. Clara hadn't just taken money. She had controlled the narrative. Carefully. Patiently. She made sure Daniel believed I was fine. And made sure I never knew otherwise. I turned another page. And another. There were no mistakes. No missed payments. No irregularities. Which meant one thing. This wasn't panic. Or impulse. This was a plan. A long one. I placed the folder flat on the table. Lined it up with the edge. Straight. Neat. Controlled. Just like everything else in this house. Then I stood up. Walked to the cabinet above the sink. Reached for a glass. Filled it halfway with water. Drank slowly. My hands didn't shake. That part was over. Shock is loud. But understanding? Understanding is quiet. I set the glass down. Turned back toward the table. And this time, I didn't look at the papers. I looked beyond them. At everything they implied. Clara's voice at the funeral. "I'm not taking care of that old witch." It wasn't just cruelty. It was certainty. Because in her mind, she had already removed me. Financially. Emotionally. Practically. Piece by piece. Until I was nothing more than an inconvenience she could choose to ignore. I walked into the living room. Picked up my phone from the side table. Held it for a moment. There were options. Of course there were. I could call her. Confront her. Demand answers. But that would give her something. Time. Time to adjust. To explain. To twist. No. Clara had played this slowly. Carefully. Over 2 years. She deserved the same. I set the phone back down. Untouched. Then I returned to the kitchen. Picked up the folder. And this time, I smiled. Just a little. Not because any of this was good, but because it was clear. And clarity is power. Clara thought I didn't know. Now I did. And more importantly, she still thought I didn't. That was her second mistake. I slid the folder into my bag, zipped it closed, and for the first time since the funeral, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. I wasn't going to fight her. Not yet. I was going to watch. And wait. Because people like Clara, they don't stop. They get comfortable. And when they do, that's when they make their biggest mistakes. The house had its own rhythm again. Quiet. Predictable. Controlled. I woke up the next morning at the same time. 6:15 a.m. No alarm. Just habit. I made my coffee the same way. Black. No sugar. Sat at the same chair. Watched the same patch of sunlight slowly stretch across the kitchen floor. From the outside, nothing had changed. And that was exactly how I wanted it. Because people like Clara don't watch closely when they think they've already won. I took a slow sip of coffee and let my mind settle. Not on the anger. Not on the betrayal. On the pattern. 2 years. 26 payments. No mistakes. No interruptions. That meant consistency. Routine. Access. Clara hadn't just taken money. She had positioned herself. Carefully. And that kind of behavior doesn't start suddenly. It grows. Quietly. Over time. I leaned back slightly in my chair and let the past rearrange itself. Not as memories, but as evidence. The first time Clara insisted on handling the paperwork. The way she gradually took over conversations about finances. The small corrections. The subtle interruptions. Oh, Daniel, I already took care of that. No need to worry your mom with details. I've got everything under control. At the time, it sounded helpful, efficient, responsible. Now, it sounded like something else entirely. Control. I stood up and walked into the hallway. The house was still. Every door closed. Every object exactly where it had been the day before. I stopped in front of Daniel's old room. My hand rested lightly on the doorknob. For a moment, I didn't move. Then I opened it. The room hadn't changed much. I never had the heart to redo it. Even after he moved out. Even after he got married. The bed was still in the same place. The bookshelf still held his old trophies. The desk still had a small scratch on the corner from when he dropped a lamp at 16. I stepped inside. Slowly. This was where he used to sit and tell me everything. School problems. Work stress. Little things that seemed big at the time. And later, things he didn't fully say. I walked to the desk. Ran my fingers lightly over the surface. There it was again. That feeling. Not grief. Clarity. Daniel had trusted her. That much was obvious. But trust can be redirected. Especially when someone is careful and patient. I turned toward the closet. Opened it. Most of his things were gone, of course. Clara had taken what she wanted after they married. But a few boxes remained. Old papers. Books. Things that didn't matter anymore. Or at least, things she thought didn't. I knelt down. Pulled one of the boxes closer. Opened it. Folders. Documents. Old receipts. Nothing unusual. Until I saw the envelope. Plain. White. Unmarked. I picked it up. Turned it over. Sealed. That was enough to make me pause. Daniel wasn't careless with documents. If something was sealed, it was meant to be. I opened it carefully. Inside a single folded sheet. I recognized his handwriting immediately. Mom. Just that one word, and everything else faded for a second. I sat down on the edge of the bed. Opened the letter fully. I know you don't like talking about money, it began. A small, familiar smile touched my lips. That sounded like him. But I've been setting something up to make sure you're taken care of. I didn't want to make it a big deal, and I know you'd probably tell me not to worry. But I am your son. That's my job. I read it slowly. Every word. Every line. I asked Clara to help organize some of it, just to keep things simple. But everything is meant for you. Always you. My eyes didn't blur. They didn't fill with tears. They just stayed still. Focused. Even if I'm not around someday, I want you to be okay. Promise me you won't refuse help just because you think you should handle everything alone. I folded the letter once. Then again. Carefully. Everything is meant for you. He trusted her to help. And she used that trust as a doorway. Not to support, but to redirect. I stood up slowly. Held the letter in my hand. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about intention. Daniel had been clear. Precise. Deliberate. And Clara had chosen to ignore that. Or worse. Rewrite it. I placed the letter back in the envelope. But I didn't put it back in the box. I kept it with me. Because now, I didn't just have numbers. I had proof. Not legal proof. Not yet. But something stronger. Truth. I walked back into the kitchen. Set the envelope next to my bag. Then I looked at the clock again. 11:28 a.m. Still early. Still time. Clara didn't know I had gone to the bank. She didn't know what I had seen. And she definitely didn't know about the letter. That meant one thing. I was still ahead. And I intended to stay that way. I picked up my phone again. Held it. Not to call her. Not yet. But to scroll. Messages. Old conversations. And there it was. A message from Clara. 3 weeks ago, Daniel asked me to take care of everything for you. Don't worry about finances anymore. I've got it handled. I stared at it. Simple, confident, final, and completely false. I locked the phone, set it down. Clara thought she had closed every door, covered every detail, controlled every angle. But she missed something. She forgot one thing about people like me. We pay attention, even when we seem quiet. Especially then. I took another sip of my coffee, now cold, and allowed myself one clear thought. Clara didn't just underestimate me. She misunderstood me, and that it was going to cost her. The call came that afternoon. I almost didn't answer it. The number was unfamiliar, and lately, unfamiliar usually meant unnecessary. But something in me paused, just for a second. Then I picked it up. Hello, Mrs. Hayes. The voice was older, measured, professional, but not cold. Yes, this is Martin Keller. I used to work with your son. I didn't respond immediately, not because I didn't recognize the name, but because I did. Martin Keller. Daniel had mentioned him before, more than once. Of course, I said. I remember. I'm very sorry for your loss, he continued. His tone didn't rush the words, didn't flatten them into something routine. Thank you, I replied. There was a brief pause. Not awkward. Intentional. I wasn't sure if I should call, he said. But, given certain things I've been hearing, I thought it might be important. I didn't ask what things. I already had a feeling. I'm listening, I said. Another pause. Shorter this time. Has Clara spoken to you about Daniel's accounts? His estate? Any of the arrangements he made? The question was simple, but it carried weight. No, I said calmly. She hasn't. I heard him exhale quietly. Not relief. More like confirmation. I was afraid of that, he said. I stood up slowly, walked toward the window, watched the street outside. People still moving, still unaware. What exactly are you referring to? I asked. Martin's voice lowered slightly. Not in secrecy, in care. Daniel consulted me about a year before he passed, he said. He wanted to make sure everything was structured properly, not just for Clara, but for you. I didn't interrupt. He was very clear, Martin continued. He wanted a portion of his assets set aside specifically for your support, separate from joint holdings. Protected. Protected. The words settled in, aligned perfectly with everything I had already seen. And was that done? I asked. Yes, Martin said. Legally. Thoroughly. There are documents. Signatures. Conditions. Conditions. That was new. What kind of conditions? I asked. There was a slight shift in his tone. More precise now. If those funds were ever misused, redirected, or withheld from you, he said carefully, the individual responsible would forfeit access to a much larger portion of the estate. I didn't move, didn't speak, because in that moment, everything clicked. Not just the transfers, not just the letter, the structure. Daniel hadn't just planned support. He had built a safeguard, and Clara had stepped directly into it. Mrs. Hayes, Martin added gently, I don't know what your current situation is, but if something doesn't feel right, I strongly recommend we meet. I turned away from the window, looked back at the kitchen table, at the envelope, at the bag. Everything was already there, waiting. I think that would be a good idea, I said. We set a time. The next morning, 10 a.m., his office. After the call ended, I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand. This was the part most people rush, the part where emotions take over, where anger pushes action. But I didn't rush, because now, I had something better than suspicion. I had alignment. The bank records, the letter, and now, legal confirmation. 3 separate pieces, all pointing to the same truth. Clara hadn't just taken money. She had violated a structure designed to expose exactly that behavior. I walked back to the table, picked up the envelope, slid it into the folder. Neat, organized, complete. Then I sat down again, hands resting calmly in front of me. And I thought about Clara, not emotionally, not personally, strategically. She believed she was in control, that everything had been handled, covered, contained, which meant she wasn't being careful anymore. People don't stay cautious when they think the risk is gone. They relax. And when they relax, they talk. I reached for my phone again, scrolled through recent messages. There it was. Another one. From Clara. Just 2 days ago. Let me know when you're ready to discuss moving arrangements. The house is a lot to manage alone. Moving arrangements. I read it again. Not concern. Not suggestion. Preparation. She wasn't just removing me financially. She was preparing to remove me physically. I set the phone down slowly. That confirmed it. This wasn't a moment. It was a process, and she was already several steps into it. But now so was I. I stood up, walked to the sink, rinsed my coffee cup, dried it, placed it back exactly where it belonged. Control doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like small things done precisely. Repeated. Consistent. I turned off the kitchen light, even though it was still daylight. Then I picked up my bag, checked the folder one more time. Everything was in place. Tomorrow, I would sit down with Martin, review the documents, understand every detail, and then I would decide how to proceed. Not react. Decide. Because Clara had made one more mistake. She thought this was about power. It wasn't. It was about patience. And I had far more of that than she did. The next morning, I arrived 10 minutes early. Not because I was nervous, but because I don't like to be rushed. Martin's office was on the second floor of a quiet building downtown. Brick exterior, narrow hallway, a small brass plaque by the door with his name engraved in clean, simple letters. I paused for a moment before going in, not to gather courage, but to settle my thoughts. Then I opened the door. Mrs. Hayes. Martin stood up immediately when he saw me. Same voice as on the phone. Same measured presence. We shook hands. Firm. Respectful. I appreciate you coming in, he said. So do I replied. His office was modest. Not overly decorated. No attempt to impress. A desk. 2 chairs. A bookshelf filled with thick binders. Order again. I was beginning to appreciate that. Please, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Let's take a look at everything. I placed my bag on the table. Opened it. Took out the folder. Set it down between us. I've already reviewed some bank records, I said. And I found this. I slid the printed pages toward him. Martin adjusted his glasses. Looked down. Started reading. He didn't rush. Didn't skim. He read every line. That told me something. He took this seriously. After a few minutes, he leaned back slightly. I see, he said quietly. No surprise in his voice. Just confirmation. These transfers were supposed to go directly to you, he added. Yes, I said. That's what the note said. I pulled out the letter, placed it next to the records. Martin picked it up carefully. Read it once. Then again. When he looked up, his expression had changed. Not emotional. Focused. Daniel was very clear, he said. I know. There was a brief silence. Not uncomfortable. Just precise. Then Martin reached for a drawer. Opened it. Pulled out a thick document. This, he said, placing it on the table, is the full estate plan Daniel set up. I looked at it. Didn't touch it yet. Walk me through it, I said. Martin nodded. Opened the document. Daniel separated his assets into 2 categories. He began. Joint assets with Clara and protected allocations. Protected. There is a designated fund, he continued, specifically for your monthly support. I didn't interrupt. That fund was structured to send you $1,500 per month. Automatically. I nodded once. I've seen that part. Martin turned a few pages. But here's where it becomes important, he said. He tapped a section of the document. There is a clause. I leaned forward slightly. A clause that states if those funds are redirected, withheld, or interfered with. He paused. The person responsible forfeits their access to a significantly larger portion of the estate. There it was again. Clear. Direct. Not emotional. Legal. How much? I asked. Martin didn't hesitate. Most of it. I sat back slowly. Not shocked, but aware of the weight of that answer. Daniel hadn't just protected me. He had built consequences. And Clara? I asked. Martin closed the document halfway. She is the primary beneficiary of the joint assets, he said. But those protections override her access if the conditions are violated. Override, meaning everything she thought she had, wasn't guaranteed. Does she know? I asked. Martin shook his head. Not fully, he said. Daniel chose not to emphasize that clause. Of course he didn't. Daniel never liked conflict. He believed people would do the right thing, without being forced to. I looked down at the document again. He trusted her, and she broke that trust. Not once, but every month. For over 2 years. What happens next? I asked. Martin folded his hands on the table. That depends on you. Simple. Direct. I can initiate a formal review, he explained. We can document the misuse, present the evidence, and enforce the clause. I nodded slowly. And then Clara would lose access to a substantial portion of the estate. Substantial, not symbolic. Real. And if I don't? I asked. Martin met my eyes. Then nothing changes, he said. That was the truth. Clear. Uncomplicated. I sat there for a moment. Not thinking about Clara. Not thinking about money. Thinking about Daniel. About what he had intended. What he had tried to protect. And what had been quietly taken. I reached forward. Placed my hand on the document. Steady. I don't want to rush this, I said. Martin nodded. That's wise. I want everything documented properly, I continued. Every transfer. Every detail. Of course. And I don't want her alerted yet. That made him pause. Just slightly. Then he nodded again. That can be arranged. Good. Because this wasn't the moment to confront. Not yet. This was the moment to prepare. I gathered the documents. Placed them back into my folder. Neat. Organized. Complete. Then I stood up. Thank you, Martin, I said. You're welcome, he replied. We shook hands again. And this time, there was something else in that moment. Not just professionalism. Understanding. I walked out of the office and into the daylight. The air felt different. Not lighter. Sharper. Defined. Because now, everything was in place. The bank records. The letter. The legal structure. And most importantly, time. Clara still didn't know. She still believed everything was under control. And that belief was about to become her biggest weakness. I didn't go straight home after leaving Martin's office. Not immediately. Instead, I walked. Slowly. No destination in mind. The city moved around me like it always did. Cars passing. People talking. Doors opening and closing. Normal. Everything looked normal. And that was the strange part. Because nothing about my life felt normal anymore. I crossed the street without thinking. Turned a corner. Past a small cafe Daniel used to like. He used to sit outside on Saturdays. Black coffee. No sugar. Just like me. Mom, you should try this place, he once said. They don't rush you. He was right. They didn't. I stopped for a moment. Looked at the empty table near the window. Then kept walking. Because this wasn't the time to look back. This was the time to move forward. When I finally got home, the house greeted me the same way it always did. Quiet. Still. I placed my bag on the table. Took out the folder. Set it down in front of me. Everything was there. Evidence. Proof. Structure. And yet, nothing had been done. Not yet. That was intentional. Because once I acted, there would be no going back. I sat down. Folded my hands. Looked at the papers without opening them. And then my phone buzzed. A message. From Clara. I'll stop by this afternoon. We need to talk about the house. I read it once. Then again. Same tone. Same certainty. No question. No hesitation. We need to talk. Not, are you okay? Not, how are you holding up? Just logistics. I set the phone down. So this was it. The next step in her plan. Not subtle anymore. Direct. She wasn't waiting. Which meant she believed she didn't have to. I stood up slowly. Walked to the sink. Rinsed my hands under cold water. Not because they were dirty, but because I needed the feeling. Cold. Clear. Real. I dried them carefully. Turned off the faucet. Then I looked around the kitchen. Every detail. Every object. The same place Daniel had grown up. The same place he came back to again and again. And now, the place Clara wanted to discuss. I walked back to the table. Picked up the folder. Opened it this time. Not to review. To confirm. Everything was still there. Exactly where I placed it. That mattered. Control isn't just about big decisions. It's about small ones. Repeated. I closed the folder again. Then I waited. Clara arrived right on time. 2:15 p.m. She didn't knock softly. 3 firm taps. Confident. I opened the door. She stood there in a light beige coat. Sunglasses resting on her head. Phone in one hand. Not dressed for morning. Dressed for business. Hi, she said. Her voice neutral. I stepped aside. Let her in. She walked past me without hesitation. Straight into the kitchen. Familiar. Too familiar. She placed her bag on the counter. Looked around briefly, as if assessing something. Then turned to me. We need to talk about the house, she said. There it was again. Not can we talk. We need to. I nodded once. Sit, I said. She pulled out a chair. Sat down. Crossed her legs. Comfortable. Very comfortable. I took my seat across from her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she leaned forward slightly. It's too much for you, she said. Simple. Direct. The upkeep, the costs, it doesn't make sense for you to stay here alone. Her tone was calm. Reasonable. Practiced. I've been thinking, she continued. We should look into something more manageable. Maybe a smaller place. Or a community. A community. I let the word sit. Senior housing. That's what she meant. I can help coordinate everything, she added. Of course she could. She had been coordinating everything for a long time. I looked at her. Really looked this time. At the confidence. The control. The absence of hesitation. And I understood something clearly. She wasn't asking. She was informing. Because in her mind, the decision had already been made. You've thought this through, I said. She nodded. Yes. It's the most practical option. Practical. I repeated the word silently. Then I leaned back slightly, hands resting in my lap. And when were you planning to tell me? I asked. She didn't blink. I'm telling you now. Of course. Right on schedule. I nodded again. Calm. Measured. Just like her. Clara, I said quietly. She looked at me. Yes. I held her gaze for a moment. Not challenging. Not emotional. Just steady. Then I spoke. I think you're right. That caught her. Just a little. A flicker. About the house, I continued. She relaxed slightly. Good. Let her. It is a lot to manage, I said. She nodded again. Exactly. I folded my hands together. And you've clearly put a lot of thought into this. I have, she said. Of course she had. For 2 years. Carefully. Consistently. I appreciate that, I added. Now she was fully at ease. Certain. She leaned back in her chair. So, we're on the same page? She asked. I paused. Just long enough. Then I gave a small nod. For now, I said. 2. Simple words. But I watched her carefully. She didn't question them. Didn't analyze them. Because she heard what she wanted to hear. Agreement. Control. Confirmation. That was her third mistake. We talked a little longer. Details. General ideas. Nothing specific. Nothing binding. Exactly how I wanted it. Then she stood up. I'll start looking into options, she said. Of course she would. She always moved quickly. When she thought she was winning. I walked her to the door. She paused briefly before leaving. Don't worry, she said. I've got everything handled. I almost smiled. Almost. Of course you do, I replied. She left. The door closed. And the house returned to silence. But this time, it felt different. Not empty. Prepared. I walked back to the table. Opened my bag. Took out the folder. Placed it in front of me. Then I said it out loud. Very quietly. So do I. That evening, I didn't turn on the lights right away. I let the house sit in the dim, natural glow of the late afternoon. Soft shadows stretched across the floor. Familiar shapes, slightly distorted. It felt appropriate. Because everything looked the same. But nothing was. I set my bag down on the table. Took out the folder. Placed it exactly where it had been earlier. Same position. Same angle. Control. I walked to the window. Looked out. The street was quieter now. Fewer cars. Longer shadows. Time had moved forward. And so had I. Clara thought today had gone well. I could see it in her face. The ease. The confidence. She believed I had agreed. For now. 2 words. And she didn't question them. That told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't listening. She was assuming. And assumptions are dangerous. I turned away from the window. Walked back to the table. Opened the folder again. This time, I didn't just look. I organized. Bank records on the left. Letter in the center. Legal documents on the right. 3 separate pieces. But together, they told one complete story. I adjusted the papers slightly. Lined them up. Not for neatness. For clarity. Because this wasn't just evidence anymore. It was structure. A sequence. A timeline. I traced it with my finger. 2 years ago. The first transfer. Shortly after that. Clara offering to handle finances. Then the conversations. The subtle changes. The quiet control. And finally, today, the house. I sat down slowly. This wasn't random. It was progression. And that meant one thing. She had a next step. I just needed to see it. I reached for my phone. Opened my messages again. Scrolled back further this time. Weeks. Months. Patterns. There. A message from Clara, almost a year ago. Daniel and I are reviewing long-term plans. Just making sure everything is efficient. Efficient. Another one. I moved some things around so it's easier to manage finances. Easier. And then, more recently, we should simplify things going forward. Simplify. Every word carefully chosen. Every step soft. But always in the same direction. Toward control. I set the phone down. She hadn't rushed. Neither would I. I stood up. Walked into the living room. Picked up a small notebook from the shelf. One I used for grocery lists. Appointments. Small things. Today, it would be something else. I sat back down, opened it, and began to write. Not emotions. Facts. Dates. Transfers. Messages. Every detail I could confirm. One by one. Line by line. No assumptions. No guesses. Just truth. Because when the time came, that would matter. I paused after a few minutes. Looked down at the page. Clean. Structured. Clear. Just like everything else I had gathered. I closed the notebook gently. This was no longer about reacting. It was about building. And I was almost ready. Almost. I leaned back in my chair. Closed my eyes for a moment. And then I thought about tomorrow. Clara would move forward. Of course she would. She would start looking into options. Maybe make a few calls. Maybe even come back with suggestions. Places. Numbers. Timelines. She would expect cooperation. Agreement. Compliance. And I would give her exactly what she expected. At first. Because the more comfortable she felt, the more she would reveal. That was how people like her worked. Not through force. Through confidence. And confidence makes people careless. I opened my eyes again. The room was darker now. I reached over. Turned on the light. Warm. Soft. Everything visible again. That's what this was about. Not exposing her immediately, but letting everything become visible. At the right moment. I gathered the papers once more. Placed them back into the folder. Carefully. Then I slid the notebook in beside them. Closed the zipper. Everything in one place. Ready. I stood up. Walked toward the hallway. Paused for a moment near the door. And I said it quietly. Not to anyone else. Just to myself. She thinks this is over. A small pause. Then, it hasn't even started. The next morning, I didn't wait for Clara to reach out. I moved first. Not aggressively. Not obviously. Just enough. At 9:12 a.m., I sent her a message. I was thinking about what you said yesterday. Maybe we should sit down again and go over everything in more detail. Simple. Neutral. No resistance. No hesitation. Exactly what she expected. Her reply came quickly. Of course. I can come by later today. Of course she could. I set the phone down. Right on schedule. People like Clara don't slow down when they think they're in control. They speed up. The house was ready long before she arrived. Not cleaned. Not arranged. Prepared. The folder stayed in my bag. The notebook stayed inside. Out of sight. For now. Because today wasn't about showing. It was about listening. She arrived earlier than yesterday. 1:40 p.m. Same confidence. Same posture. But this time, she carried a folder of her own. That was interesting. Hi, she said, walking in without waiting. Hi, I replied. She went straight to the kitchen again. Sat down. Opened her folder. Paper slid against paper. Neat. Organized. Just like mine. I've been looking into a few options, she said, pulling out printed pages. Photos. Floor plans. Price estimates. Senior communities, she added. Some of them are really nice. I nodded slowly. Show me. She seemed pleased. That was important. Because the more comfortable she felt, the more she would talk. She laid everything out on the table. Pointed at different listings. This one has assisted living services. This one includes meal plans. This one is more independent, but still manageable. Manageable. Everything was about making me smaller. Simpler. Contained. I leaned forward slightly. Looked at the papers. Then I asked the first question. How soon would something like this happen? She didn't hesitate. Within a few weeks, she said. A few weeks. Fast. Faster than necessary. Why so soon? I asked. She paused. Just for a second. Then, well, it's better not to wait too long, she said. The house, it's just not practical for you anymore. Practical again. I nodded. And what happens to the house? I asked. There it was. The real question. She leaned back slightly. Crossed her arms. We would sell it, she said. Of course. And the money? I asked. Another pause. Longer this time. It would go into managing your care, she replied. Managing. Care. Carefully chosen words. I held her gaze. And who would manage that? I asked. This time she smiled. I would, of course. Of course. I nodded slowly. That was what I needed. Not the answer. The confidence behind it. Because confidence makes people honest. Not truthful, but revealing. I reached for one of the papers. Picked it up. Looked at it. Then set it back down. And my finances now? I asked. She didn't expect that. Not yet. What do you mean? She said. I kept my tone calm. My accounts. My expenses. How are those being handled? There it was. A shift. Subtle. But real. They're under control, she said quickly. Too quickly. I've been managing everything since Daniel asked me to. That part was true, technically, but incomplete. I tilted my head slightly. Everything? I asked. Yes, she said. Firm. Confident. Certain. I nodded again. Then I asked the second question. Do you have records? That's where it happened. The smallest crack. Not in her voice. In her timing. A pause. Half a second too long. I can get them, she said. Not I have them. I can get them. I didn't react. Didn't press. Just nodded. That would be helpful, I said. She relaxed again. Because I let her. Because I didn't challenge. Not yet. We talked a little longer. More listings. More details. But it didn't matter anymore. I had what I needed. Not proof. Confirmation of behavior. Patterns. Gaps. And most importantly, confidence. Because Clara wasn't being careful. She was being comfortable. And comfort leads to mistakes. When she stood up to leave, she seemed satisfied. We'll figure everything out, she said. Of course she believed that. I walked her to the door. She turned back slightly before stepping out. Don't worry, she added. You're in good hands. I looked at her, steady, calm, and said the only thing she expected to hear. I know. She smiled. Then she left. The door closed, and the silence returned. But this time, it felt sharper, defined, because now, I had seen it clearly. Not just what she had done, but what she planned to do next. I walked back to the table, opened my bag, took out the notebook, and added one more line. She believes I trust her. I paused, then wrote the next. She's not prepared for what comes next. I closed the notebook, placed it back inside the folder, zipped it shut, everything in place, because the next step wouldn't be quiet. And when it came, it would be final. The room didn't change, but something in it shifted. Clara was still talking, still explaining, still outlining plans like everything was already hers. The house should be sold, she said. It's the most practical solution. Practical. She said it like a conclusion, not a suggestion. I didn't interrupt. I let her finish. Every word. Because people reveal the most when they think no one is going to stop them. And of course, she added, leaning back slightly, I'll continue managing everything, just like Daniel wanted. There it was. The final claim. Calm. Confident. Complete. I nodded once. Then I turned to Martin. Can we review what Daniel actually put in place? One word changed everything. Actually. Clara's eyes moved toward me. Just slightly. What do you mean? She asked. I didn't answer her. Not yet. Instead, I opened my folder. Slowly. Deliberately. Paper sliding against paper in a quiet room. That sound carries. First, the bank records. I placed them in front of her. Then the letter. Centered. Then the legal document. Last. Aligned. Complete. Clara didn't touch them. She just looked. And I watched her. Because this was the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. But final. Martin, I said. He understood immediately. He reached forward. Opened. The document. And began. Daniel established a protected structure for his mother, he said calmly. Clara shifted in her seat. Subtle, but no longer relaxed. That structure included monthly support payments, he continued, intended specifically for Mrs. Hayes. I know that, Clara said quickly. Of course she did. But this wasn't about what she knew. It was about what she did. Martin turned one page. And it also included a condition. There it was. That word again. Condition. Clara's fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the table. What condition? She asked. Her voice was still controlled, but thinner now. Martin didn't rush. He read it exactly as it was written. If those funds are redirected, withheld, or interfered with in any way, the responsible party forfeits access to a substantial portion of the estate. Silence. Not empty. Heavy. Clara blinked once. That doesn't apply here, she said. Too fast. Too certain. I reached forward and slid the bank records closer to her. Not aggressively. Just enough. 26 months, I said quietly. Her eyes dropped. Read. Skipped. Came back. Stayed. And this, I added, placing the letter beside it. She didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. She already knew what it said. For Mom. Make sure she's taken care of. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just let the words exist. Because truth doesn't need volume. It needs space. This is a misunderstanding, Clara said. There it was. The first step down. From control to defense. I looked at her. Steady. For 2 years. I asked. Silence. Longer this time. Because there wasn't a clean answer anymore. I was managing things, she said. Not wrong. But not right. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. Then I leaned back. Calm. Measured. You were. A pause. Then, but not for me. That landed. Not loud. But deep. Clara opened her mouth. Then stopped. Because for the first time, she didn't have anything prepared. The room held still. And I realized something. This wasn't the moment she lost control. She lost it a long time ago. She just didn't know it yet. Mrs. Hayes, Martin said quietly. We can proceed with enforcement. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Clara, because this part mattered. Not for the outcome, but for the truth. For 2 years, I said softly, you thought I didn't see. A small pause. I do now. No anger. No shaking. Just clarity. And that was worse. Because anger can be argued with. Clarity cannot. I closed the folder. The sound was soft, but final. I'd like everything processed exactly as Daniel wrote it. I said, no more. No less. Clara didn't respond. She just sat there. Still. Quiet. And for the first time, she looked exactly how she had tried to make me feel. Small. Not because I made her that way, but because the truth did. And I didn't need to say anything else. Because this time, she was the one being left behind. Clara didn't follow me out of the office. She stayed seated. That was the first thing I noticed. 3 days ago, she would have stood immediately, taken control of the room, directed the next step. Now she didn't move. I paused briefly at the door. Not long enough to be obvious. Just enough to understand what had changed. Then I left. The hallway felt quieter than before. Not because it was, but because something had settled. A line had been crossed, and there was no returning from it. I walked outside. The air was cool, clear, the kind of clarity that doesn't come from the weather. It comes from knowing. When I got home, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt resolved. Not fixed, not healed, but aligned. Everything was where it needed to be. I placed my bag on the table, took out the folder, set it down. Same place, same position, routine again. But this time, it meant something different. I sat down, didn't open it. I didn't need to, because nothing inside it had changed. What changed was everything outside of it. My phone rang about an hour later. I knew who it was before I looked. Clara, of course. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Yes. Her voice came quickly. We need to talk. There it was again. The same line. But it didn't sound the same. Not anymore. About what? I asked. A pause. Longer than usual. Then, you didn't have to do that, she said. Not anger. Not yet. More like pressure. Trying to push the moment back into something she could manage. I didn't do anything, I replied calmly. Another pause. Yes, you did, she said. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. Bigger. I leaned back in my chair. For 2 years. I asked. Silence. That question again. Simple. And still no answer. This isn't fair, she said finally. There it was. The shift. From control to negotiation. I let the words sit. Because fairness wasn't the point. It never had been. Daniel trusted me, she continued. I nodded slightly. I know, I said. And I was handling things, she added. Yes, I replied. Careful. Calm. Measured. And now you're trying to take everything away, she said. That was interesting. Because that wasn't what I had said. Not once. I'm not taking anything, I said quietly. I let the sentence finish itself. I'm following what he said in place. That stopped her. Not completely, but enough. You don't understand how complicated this is, she said. There it was again. Complicated. I looked down at the table. At nothing in particular. Then back up. It's not complicated, I said. And this time, my voice didn't change. It's very simple. Another silence. Longer now. Heavier. What do you want? She asked finally. That was new. Not a statement. A question. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know, but because I wanted her to sit in that moment. To feel it. Then I spoke. I want exactly what Daniel intended. Nothing more. Nothing less. She exhaled. Sharp. Controlled. And if I don't agree? She asked. I paused. Just enough. It's not about agreement, I said. It's already written. That was the difference. And she knew it. The silence that followed wasn't resistance anymore. It was realization. I didn't mean for it to turn out like this, she said. The words came softer now. Less precise. Less controlled. But I didn't respond to that. Because meaning wasn't what mattered. Actions were. I'll have my lawyer look at everything, she added. Of course she would. That was expected. That was fine. That's your choice, I said. Calm. Neutral. Another pause. Then she hung up. I placed the phone down gently. Not abruptly. Not with force. Because nothing about this required force. Anymore. I sat there for a moment. Just breathing. Not heavy. Not emotional. Steady. Then I stood up. Walked to the window. Looked out. The street was quiet. Late afternoon again. Same as yesterday. Same as the day before. But I wasn't the same. For 2 years, I had been part of something I didn't see. Something quiet. Something controlled. Now, I saw all of it. And more importantly, I had stepped out of it. I turned away from the window. Walked back to the table. Opened the folder. Just once. Not to check. To acknowledge. Everything was still there. Clear. Organized. Then I closed it again. Because the outcome was already in motion. And for the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel like I was reacting anymore. I felt like I was standing exactly where I was supposed to be. And Clara was finally the one trying to catch up. The house was quiet again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt mine. Not just legally. Not just on paper. But fully. Days passed. Slow. Steady. No more calls from Clara. No more messages. No more we need to talk. Silence. But not the kind that hurts. The kind that settles. The kind that stays. Martin finalized everything exactly as Daniel had written it. Every account. Every condition. Every line. Nothing changed. Because nothing needed to. The truth had already done the work. Clara tried once. Through her lawyer. A short letter. Carefully worded. Misunderstanding. Intent. Complication. Words. Just words. And for the first time, they meant nothing. Because for 2 years, her actions had already spoken louder. And now, they couldn't be undone. The house stayed mine. The same walls. The same floors. The same quiet mornings. But I moved through it differently. Not like someone holding on to memories, but like someone who understood them. I went into Daniel's room one afternoon. The same bed. The same desk. The same scratch on the corner. Nothing had changed. And somehow, everything had. I sat down slowly. Took out his letter. Mom. Just that word. And it still felt like he was here. I want you to be okay. I used to think that meant money. Stability. Security. But I was wrong. He didn't mean survival. He meant dignity. I folded the letter carefully. Held it in my hands a moment longer. Then I said it quietly. I am. Not because things were easy. Not because nothing hurt. But because I finally saw everything clearly. For 2 years, I thought I was becoming less important. Less needed. Less present. That's what it felt like. Like life was slowly moving past me. But it wasn't that. I wasn't disappearing. I was being pushed. Quietly. Carefully. And I didn't even see it. Until now. I walked back into the kitchen. Made my coffee. Black. No sugar. Sat in the same chair. Watched the same light move across the floor. Nothing new. And yet, everything felt different. Because this time, I wasn't sitting there waiting for someone to decide what happened next. I already knew. My phone stayed silent on the table. No missed calls. No messages. No one checking in. And for the first time, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like peace. Clara called me a burden. Something to manage. Something to move. Something to remove. But she forgot something. Something simple. Something she never understood. I didn't become strong because someone protected me. I became strong because I built everything myself. This house. This life. This family. And when she tried to take control of it, she didn't just make a mistake. She revealed exactly who she was. And in doing that, she gave me something I didn't know I needed. Clarity. I stood up. Walked to the front door. Opened it. The air outside was still. Calm. I stepped forward. Not leaving. Just stepping into something new. Because this wasn't the end. Not really. It was the moment everything finally became clear. And clarity doesn't make you weaker. It makes you untouchable. I looked ahead, then said one last thing. Not loudly. Not for anyone else. Just for me. She thought I was a burden. A small pause. She forgot who built everything she tried to take. And this time, I didn't look back.